It started with a wet patch on my wall. Now I live in a forest. There's a rot in my apartment that has nothing to do with the plumbing. It started as a stain on the hallway wall, a discolored patch of wallpaper the size of my hand. I figured it was just the building settling into its grave. Maybe none of this would have happened. I was dealing with the snails, same as always. It's my job. I'd lost track of how many runs I'd made, dumping buckets of the things in designated zones across the city. 4 separate sites, and the count was finally starting to dip. It swallowed the orange glow of the streetlights, leaving them as lonely, fuzzy beacons in a sea of black. A strange prickle ran up my spine. I'm not afraid of the dark. Never have been. That was the first alarm bell ringing in the back of my skull. I was kicking off my boots when my eyes snapped to the stain. I didn't choose to look. It felt more like the wall demanded my attention. Usually, they feel dense, like a psychic weight pulling you in, wanting you to see, wanting to feed on your fear. This was different. It felt like a vacuum. A hollowness that tugged not at my body, but at the space where my bones met my marrow. There was no pressure, just an absence, a void. I left one boot by the door and walked closer, my sock whispering against the worn floorboards. The patch seemed to bulge in the low light, the floral pattern on the wallpaper distorting. It had a sheen to it, a faint luminescence that didn't belong in my dim apartment. A trick of the light, my brain supplied, a desperate attempt at logic. I reached out, planting my palm flat against the wall beside it. It felt solid. I knocked. Thud. Thud. A good, solid sound. Plaster and wood. Then something happened that I still can't properly explain. Next to my hand, the wallpaper began to bubble. It swelled outward, stretching the little printed daisy into a grotesque leer. It grew, pulled taut, and then it split open with a sound like wet paper tearing. Pop. Cinder slid out. The little splotch of dark on his shell was smudged, just like I remembered. He landed on the baseboard with a faint, distinct click. I just stared. He sat there, his little eye stalks twitching. Then another click. And another. And then the entire patch of wallpaper peeled away from the wall. You know that feeling when you pull off a big, dry scab too soon? The sound was the audio equivalent of that feeling. A ripping, sticky, moist sound that made my teeth ache. For one frozen second, I saw exactly what was coming, but my feet were bolted to the floor. A river of snails poured from the wound in the wall. An impossible, obscene cascade of them. A slow-motion waterfall of clicking shells and soft bodies and questing eye stalks. They just kept coming. And they brought the smell with them. It bloomed in the air, growing stronger with every body that joined the pile. Sickly sweet. The smell of mushrooms and rot, of deep forest soil turned over after a rain. The smell of things that live and die in the dark. By the time my brain screamed at my legs to move, The wall was alive. The paper rippled and pulsed, the plaster behind it seeming to breathe in soft, shallow waves. Snails were everywhere, a carpet of them spreading across the floor. The gash in the wall widened, the edges curling back like lips. I think I said something profound, like, "Oh, you have got to be fucking kidding me." And then the world went black. The light didn't just go out, the sound did too. A deep, profound silence fell over everything. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, my own ragged breathing, my goddamn heartbeat. All of it, gone. My senses were just switched off, crawling up my legs, over my arms, across my face, hundreds of tiny soft bodies in the hard ridges of their shells, the feeling of minuscule mouths, rasping, tasting, leaving cold trails of slime on my skin. Snails aren't fast. They don't have to be when there are enough of them. When my mind finally rebooted, the first thing I did was scream. I screamed until my throat felt like it was full of shredded glass. Then I started clawing at myself, spinning and thrashing like a cornered animal, trying to get them off me, get them off, get them off. It was pure instinct, no thought, just a primal need to be free of their touch. I stumbled backward, still blind, still deaf to the world outside my own screaming. My back hit the opposite wall. It wasn't solid. It was wet, yielding, and sharp bits of shell embedded in the slime scraped against my shoulder blades. The shock of it propelled me forward again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. My feet sank into the floor. It was like walking on a carpet of marble soaked in motor oil. Each step was a wet, grinding burst of sound and sensation as I crushed countless shells, my weight sinking into a morass of slime and viscera. I tripped. I don't know what on. My hands flew out and I caught myself on the doorframe to the living room. And I could see again. A wave of nausea crashed over me. The room spun, a kaleidoscope of pulsing walls and a floor paved with shattered shells. I couldn't get enough air. I was drowning. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I was standing, stock still, my fingers digging into the wood of the doorframe. The snails were gone. The living ones, anyway. My skin was cold and slick with their trails, but they weren't on me anymore. The floor, though, the floor was a graveyard. A solid layer of broken, empty shells, every color from bone white to deep umber. I reached for the light switch. My fingers sank into the wall. Not all the way through, just into it, like pushing your hand into a loaf of wet bread. I snatched my hand back. A perfect impression of my palm was indented into the wall around the switch. It was still dark. The lights weren't working. But this was still my apartment. That was a comfort for about 2 seconds. Then I noticed two things that were very, very wrong. First, I looked toward my living room window. The city wasn't there. I was no longer on the 5th floor. Second, Cinder was sitting on my phone, which lay face up on the floor nearby. Its screen cast a soft, pale light on his shell. Just a perfectly ordinary, moist little guy with a smudged splotch and a name. I almost let out a choked laugh. Beneath his slime trail, the background on my phone had changed. It used to be a picture of a glorious kebab I ate 6 months ago. Now, it was a photograph of a dense pine forest at twilight. The same forest I could now see outside my window. I don't know how to explain where I am. I'm home, but I'm not. My apartment is here, a box of wood and plaster sitting in the middle of nowhere. If you stood outside, that's all you'd see. It's not in the building anymore. My phone works, which feels like a fucking miracle. No electricity or water, obviously. But I have a signal. That felt like a victory at first. Now I'm not so sure. What the hell do you even do? Call the cops? The city? Yeah, hi. My apartment seems to have been relocated to, well, I'm not sure. Some woods? What do you Google? Apartment teleported by snail apocalypse? I thought about posting what happened, trying to find someone who knows what this is, but so far, I've got nothing. So I called Cormac. It's his job to know things. It took 4 tries for the call to connect. His voice came through, tinny and annoyed. "Why are you calling this line, Casimir?" he asked, his tone flat. "You haven't logged a case closure in over a week." Yeah, that's kind of the problem. I tried to explain. The patch. The wall splitting open. The snails. All of the snails. The forest. I described Cinder in painstaking detail. Cormac listened without interruption. I could hear the faint click of a keyboard in the background. When I finally ran out of words, the silence on the line was heavy. I held my breath. He sighed, a long, suffering sound. "All right," he said. "So you've experienced a localized reality displacement." "I'm in a forest, Cormac." "Yes. And you're unsure if this forest occupies a standard terrestrial coordinate." "Correct. And the biosignature is still with you." "The what? You mean Cinder? The snail?" "Yeah, he's here." "Good. That's a start." Another pause. I pictured him scrolling through some arcane database, looking up the incident code for trans-dimensional snail infestations. "Here is the protocol," he said, his voice shifting into a formal bureaucratic monotone. "I am logging a Category 3 displacement event and escalating it to the archives. They may have a precedent. I will also notify maintenance." "Maintenance for what?" "To fix my wall, to retrieve your effects, should the situation deteriorate." I'm being blunt, Casimir, because we have very little to go on. We can't act without more data. You're going to have to provide it. He sighed again. "More typing. In the meantime," he continued, "I suggest you perform your function. You are a banisher. A middling one, at best. But this is what you do. So do it. What's the worst that could happen? More snails? They haven't actually harmed you. Frankly, I suspect they're a symptom, not the cause." He had a point, which only made me feel worse. The rest of the call was him reiterating that I needed to interface with the anomaly and establish a baseline before he finally hung up. So here I am. I take Cinder for walks around the property. It's just endless, silent forest. Pine trees, tangled roots, the ground a crunchy carpet of needles and broken shells. It smells exactly like the snails did. I haven't seen a single other living creature. I took inventory. Most of my gear is here. Bags of salt, holy water, iron filings, bundles of herbs, my books of rites. The only thing missing is my right boot, the one I took off before this whole mess started. Annoying. They were good boots. I've been getting ready. I figure I can't make it worse. So I'm going with the shotgun approach. For my first attempt, I made a hybrid, a little bit of everything. Threw down a half circle of salt mixed with vervain and rowan ash. Set up some of my battery-powered candles because, liminal camping preparedness. Poured some holy water into a chipped coffee mug. The whole place smells like a New Age shop now, so that's something. It's hard to pray when you don't know who or what you're praying to. I tried my best, running through a few psalms, some Old Norse words, a couple of folk charms. When nothing happened, I started begging. "I don't know what you are," I whispered to the pulsing wall, to the silent trees, to myself. But I'm asking nicely. Please, just let me go home. Thank you. The air didn't stir. The battery-powered candles flickered, but they're designed to do that. At some point during the setup, Cinder had moved from my shoulder to the far corner of the room. He was as far away from my pathetic little ritual as he could get, happily munching on a soggy patch of drywall. Now that's interesting. That could mean it worked. Or it could just mean he recognizes a crazy person having a breakdown. Either way, I guess I'll keep watch tonight. It's too quiet out there. Dangerously quiet. I've always been alone, I guess. But there were always people nearby. In the building, on the street. A background hum of humanity. I never realized it was a kind of safety until it was gone.